Okay, so you heard me talk a little bit about, who I am, and there's going to be some overlap here. This is what I would consider how my neurotype has really just came to the surface for me. Um, you heard me describe my academic career, and I seem to be doing really well. And I actually remember, this is very embarrassing, but I remember we did this like career counseling thing in college, and they asked the question, what the awful question that every job asks you: what are your weaknesses? And me, my son does this too. It's kind of hilarious. Me being me, I'm like 21 years old or whatever. Maybe it's 20. I was like, I don't know. I don't really have any. And I believed it, because up until that point, I felt like I was just this, like I'm doing really well. I'm intelligent. I'm doing well in my classes. I'm making friends. I felt like I was doing well at life at that point. And there were things going on that didn't become apparent until later, not just my PDA, but there were other things. And that'll come up too, as I do episodes. I'll share some of these experiences I've had in my relationships that I didn't realize were problematic. But anyway, point is, at that point, I thought I was doing very well. When things came crashing down, go from this like pinnacle of high where I just think I'm the most amazing person in the world to lowest of low, where I'm not even leaving my home for a year. It was when I got pregnant with our second child. This was in 2014, and I felt this shift happening. So when Mimo, Guillermo is his name, my pregnancy with Guillermo was not planned, but that didn't matter to me. I was excited. We wanted to have more kids. It was great. But I felt something inside of me start to panic. And even right before I found out I was pregnant, a friend of mine offered me this job that seemed like a really good job in marketing. And I was like, that's kind of cool. So it was a different kind of job. It had flexibility. It had this potential for growth. I could maybe be involved in something, big. And when she was telling me about the job, I was like, is there anything part-time? Now, I highlight this because up until then, I had been able to kind of keep my stress level low by not working too much. And that's part of why I was killing it at life, is because the stress, our expenses were low. We just didn't need that much to get by. And so when she said, no, I don't think that we can, he doesn't have a part-time position for this. This is like full-time or nothing. I went ahead and went for it, even though I had hesitations. So then when the pregnancy happened, I guess that's when I was like, oh, I don't know. I just knew I was biting off more than I could chew, but I didn't know what to do. I had no clue what to do. And even my husband and I were not on the same page then about what role each of us was taking. Just no idea. So I tried pushing through. I think it only took me about 3 months of the job, and I started to decline. And I remember just feeling so frustrated at myself, like, come on, Brooke, you can do this. Like, people do this all the time. People have families. People work. They work more than just part time, and they make it happen. And you're just lazy. You've never had to try hard enough. Your parents always kind of bailed you out, and so I had all this self-talk going on in my head about how I needed to push, because that's all I could think of. It was like, well, push and get through it, and then it will get better. So I pushed, and I pushed, and I pushed, and I have this one memory, because part of my job was that I was well, the major part of my job was I was traveling store to store, these different grocery stores, and helping in the deli departments and the bakery departments for a marketing company. And I remember standing there. I traveled to a store and I just sat there, or I stood there, and I was staring at the King's Hawaiian rolls, and I just couldn't do anything. I was like, nothing. I had nothing inside of me. And even then, what I was doing to just kind of to get by was because I had autonomy at my job where I chose the stores I went to. No one was keeping track of me. I picked stores. I just picked them. I picked the stores that I wanted to go to. What I started doing was spending most of my time driving. So I would show up at a store, barely look at it, and then leave and go to the next store. And sometimes I would choose stores way far away from each other so that I spent most of my time driving. Um, and I hit a wall, and I went to my husband and I went to my OBGYN and I was like, I'm exhausted. I can't do this. Now, this part I'm going to kind of condense a little bit because I have a lot of residual bitterness and anger, but kind of save it for another time. But when I spoke to my OBGYN about my exhaustion and me wanting to file for short-term disability, he basically, I mean, he didn't take me seriously at all. He was like, he literally said to me, pregnancy is not a disability. And I was so, I didn't know, again, like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm dying. I felt like I was drowning. And there was no obvious handhold. So here I am, supposed to be doing okay, and obviously not doing okay. I called my mom and I burst into tears, and my mom was like, "You're depressed," which yes, that was at least a handhold finally. I think even then I knew it wasn't just depression, but I was like, yes, this. So I fought and fought and fought whatever I could to. I tried for short-term disability. I stopped working. They were really my company was really supportive of my needs. They believed me, but it was hell. Actually, it was complete hell working with the insurance company trying to get disability then, and I tanked. I mean, I was out. Like I I was gone socially. I barely did anything. The most I did was stay home. I watched TV. Um, we got we had no money because the disability wasn't coming through, so I had no money. And my husband had been staying home at the time, like stay at home dad. And I kept telling him, well, don't, like, I kept holding him off, like, don't worry about getting a job. This disability is supposed to come through. In my naive eyes, that was what I thought was supposed to happen. Um, we did have food stamps. So that was like one thing I remember enjoying at that time was like I could go out and I could pick my meals and make things at home. That was like, I think the only thing I did that was for pleasure. Everything else was just like vegetation and laying in bed because that's all I could manage. I didn't, kind of mentioning my spiritual side, which is important to me. I couldn't even pray. Like I couldn't pray. I couldn't read anything. Obviously didn't go to church. I barely saw my parents. Um, it was very traumatic, and I'll mention that I do think it was very traumatic too for the whole household. Like, my husband at the time, he did eventually get a job, but then after that it's like a lot of things started to fall apart, and it was hard. I just didn't know, again, I didn't know where to start. Like, what do I do? What's the wrong thing that happened here? When you don't have an answer to that question, what went wrong, you don't know how to fix it. So it's like just winging it, just completely winging it. So I did quit my job eventually. I just let him know it wasn't going to happen. I uh, we had to move in with my parents for a while, and I did try working again, but I worked at another company that had a good reputation for treating their employees well. It was a call center, and I was like, I have a great phone voice. I've had a great phone voice. So I tried that. Same thing. It hardly took any time at all this time. I just crashed and burned within a month. I was crying at work. Had to let that one go. And kind of past that, a lot of life things happened, a lot of life changes happened, but overall I just decided I don't know what's not working here, but I'm not working. So I was like, I guess I can't work because this isn't working. So I stopped trying to work and just focused on the household and the kids. We ended up moving back to Oregon, and I got pregnant with our third. It took about 3 years before I started to feel like maybe there was something of the old me left inside. I started doing more things for enjoyment, maybe leaving the house, doing a few projects, kind of barely like working on keeping the house clean the way I wanted it. It was just very, very slow process. Um, then again, so then here again, and I'm sorry if this story is dragging out. I'm just trying to illustrate how, I mean, maybe the longness of it illustrates how bleak it feels to like just have your life stop, you know? That's what it felt like. It felt like my life was just stopped. And I was no longer a player in it. I no longer had choices. I felt like I went from having a lot of different choices to having no choices. And I did let go of a lot of things that I still think are unimportant or weren't as important as I thought they were. Um, but it was a very painful journey to go through it that way, a very traumatic way to go through it. I started to feel better. Like I said, I started to feel better. I guess it was around 2019 or 20. Around when COVID hit is when I started to feel better. In fact, right before COVID hit, I started to leave the house more with the kids. So I remember that. I was like, oh, look, I finally want to go out and go to the library and go places. Yeah. Um, I did. I did go places, but definitely when COVID hit, back to, we were back to like, oh, we're staying home all the time again. So um, here again, and I'll kind of condense this. I did have about a year where I was doing pretty well, and I was starting to do things again and get out and go places I liked and hang out with people. And then more stuff happened, and half of the stuff was outside of my control. Some of the things were within my control. I tried doing a job from home this time. I thought maybe the issue is me trying to work outside of the home. So I tried working from home. I did um, like a transcriptionist. Sorry, spaced out there for a second. Tried doing a transcriptionist job, and that was like the same kind of like start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. So that was just the whole thing, very demoralizing, very sobering, very exhausting. It was exhausting on myself. It was exhausting on my husband. It was exhausting for my kids because they were holed up as much as I was holed up. So it was, I was not in a very positive place. Um, and it was last year, summertime, that a friend of mine, I said something, I don't know what it was I said to her, but she sent me a link to PDA, pathological demand avoidance. And I remember reading it and I was like, well, yeah, there it is. I'm like, that's me, that's me. Even when I filed for disability, I told them the truth. I told them specifically, I can't handle expectations. And I remember just the smack in the face when they wrote back, like, that's not a diagnosis. Like, that's denied, not a diagnosis. I'm like, how can this not be a diagnosis? Like, this is my life. I'm living it and no one's recognizing it. So she sent me that link to PDA and I was like, that is me. And it was so validating. But I identified at that time, I didn't see myself as autistic. So I thought, you know what? I'm one of these ones they're mentioning in here that possibly aren't autistic, but maybe it's due to trauma. And the last bit of this story, and then I'll wrap it up, is that 6 months later, I had an internet stranger very kindly walk me through how PDA can change the presentation of how it looks, and how your autism presents. And that's when I had the revelation, like, boom, I'm not only PDA, but I'm also autistic. The impact, so what's this all mean? Why am I sharing all this? Maybe I'm boring you all to tears. I don't know. You guys can let me know afterwards. I doubt I'll tell my life story again, like to that grandeur. But the point of all this is, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a map. I had some indicator. I wasn't alone. I had people I could ask questions of, people who'd had their diagnosis for a lot longer. I had a community, and I could start to build a framework in my mind about what was reasonable for me to expect and what were common struggles I was going to have. You know, what things were I dealing with were like temporary struggles, and what things were I dealing with that were always going to trigger me. So it really helped me tease apart all the tiny little facets. And when you have multiple diagnoses, which is also very common in the autism spectrum, to not just have autism, or not just have PDA, or not just have ADHD, like, there are almost always other diagnoses going on at play. It is helpful to get an idea of what thing is driving what issue, so that you know what tool, to kind of use on it. So you've survived this far. I have talked about it. I've said, this is me. It's kind of my story in a very large, what are we at here? Like 30-minute nutshell. The last thing I want to talk about for today, excuse me. And I don't know how long these podcasts will typically be. I'm a good talker. I can talk and talk and talk. Guess I'll just wait and get some feedback from people. Or I'll just talk. You know what? My attitude kind of has to be like, here, I'll just send the content out into the internet wilderness. And if somebody cares, they will listen. And if it speaks to them, yay. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I can't control that part. So with that in mind, I'm hitting my last point here.